Hello, do you like Christmas? I do. And one thing I enjoy the most is making Christmas cookies. So I'm sharing my favorite recipe for Czech version of gingerbreads. Even though there's actually no ginger in these, but I couldn't find a better word for these. You can find the recipe in the description box. Feel free to try it. Let's start with the spices. For this recipe, ideally you need 7 kinds of spices. And those spices are star anise, cloves, allspice, fennel seed, cinnamon, anise seed, a little bit of black pepper. If you have all spices ground, you can just skip ahead and already start with the dough. Some of mine are still whole spices, so I need to crush them first. First, I crush them roughly in the mortar and pestle, and later I grind them with my spice grinder. About the amounts of the spices. In the recipe you will find the average amount, but maybe your spices are less or more strong, so choose according to your spices and taste. To finish grinding my spices, I use this salt and pepper grinder, but you can achieve similar result also with just mortar and pestle, it just takes longer. There is kind of a ratio to the spices. The biggest amounts should be cinnamon, cloves, star anise and allspice, and smaller amount of the rest. You could technically even skip those. Now we can start with the dough. We will need flour, icing sugar, butter, spices, honey, and eggs. Oh, and baking powder. If you live in Czech Republic, you want to use this kind of flour. It's very fine wheat flour. But I don't, so I'm gonna use this one, Button Bloom. It's finer than all-purpose flour, but I made this recipe with all-purpose flour before and it was just fine. So basically mix everything together. Make a nice pool in your flour and sugar and put the liquid ingredients in the middle. Now here I measured the spices to have 3 teaspoons, but in the end I've added everything because my spices were a bit older and they weren't strong enough. There's one ingredient I forgot to mention, that's cocoa, and I added for color, so I added about a tablespoon of cocoa. Now carefully mix everything together. No matter how much I love baking, there's one thing I really don't like, and that's a feeling of cold, slimy egg between my fingers. So I use knife to mix that in, and then I go with my hands into it. So I have listed the ingredients down there, but because our eggs might be a bit different size, or maybe our honey is tiny bit different, you might want to adjust the recipe. Just feel it. The dough must be nice and soft and ever so slightly sticky on the surface. But if it turns out too sticky, just feel free to add a bit more flour. Knead it properly. Don't worry about your butter, because we are not making short paste, so it can get warm from your hands. As you can see, I have added a bit more of the spices because the aroma wasn't strong enough. And later I have added even a bit more because my spices really wasn't as good anymore. I need to get new ones. My eggs were probably a tiny bit bigger, or I have added a bit more honey than I would normally do, so I'm adding a little bit more of flour in. Now this is a really good consistency. So now we need to wrap it in the plastic foil and let it rest in the fridge for at least an hour. In the past I have even let it rest overnight and it was just fine. So you can make your dough ahead. We can split it up into pieces. The half I'm not using, I'm gonna put back in the fridge so it does not get too warm. And we can work and roll out the half we have here. Sprinkle some flour on your surface, but not too much. You don't want the dough to get too floury. Your rollout dough should be about 3 or 4 millimeters thick. Okay, time to cut out the shapes. As you can see, I have lots of shape. I'm a bit of a cookie cutter hoarder, so I don't actually know how many of them I have in total, but it's loads. Okay, now I have another piece of dough. You maybe noticed that it's a bit darker. It's because I've added some cocoa and spices, because I wasn't so happy with the results of the first batch. They just weren't up to my taste. In the oven they go, and in the meantime, prepare yourself some egg wash. Mix an egg with a splash of rum. And after 10 to 12 minutes they're done. The baking time depends on the size of your cookies. After baking, slide them off the tray immediately to stop the baking process, and you need to put the egg wash on. Make sure you put a very thin layer on, otherwise it will be chunky. This egg wash layer will make your cookies shiny. Now on to the royal icing. You need an egg white from 1 egg, a splash of lemon juice, and powdered sugar. Make sure to sieve your powdered sugar to remove all the bigger pieces. If you don't sieve it, you're risking that your piping bag will clog more often. Always make a smaller batch of sugar and then mix it in, so you can check the thickness of your icing. Also make sure that you whip it a little bit, so your icing gets fluffier. And you don't have to add that much of sugar when you whip it. I usually try the consistency on my hand, if it's thick enough, if it holds the shape. Okay, so it's thick enough now, so I'm gonna fill it into my piping bag. In the past, when I did not have the piping bags, I would just use a regular plastic bag and I would cut off the corner. To prevent the leftover icing from drying, put some plastic wrap on top and put it in your fridge. If you want to reuse it, make sure you mix it through. Here you can see a slight difference in the colors of the two batches I made. And some of the shapes I made, some are Christmassy, some not so much, but I really like the shapes, like the giraffe or unicorn or little moomin and kitties and so on. Now onto the piping. If these are your first gingerbreads and you never piped royal icing before, maybe I have some useful tips for you. It's very important to keep your pressure steady. And if you keep the pressure steady, it's easier to make one line in one piece. All these decorating shots are in much faster speed than in real life, so give yourself a time. Just enjoy it. So what about you? Do you have any cookies or pastry that you have connected with Christmas? Is there perhaps a tradition you never miss during the Christmas? Okay, so I hope this video was useful to you. I must say for me it was a bit difficult because I've never baked in front of camera, and a lot of the time I was just thinking about the framing and everything instead of baking, so I made more mistakes than I would normally make. And here are some of the results. I still have many more to decorate, and the next video I'm gonna upload will be gingerbread house, so stay tuned. I hope it's gonna be interesting. And if you perhaps made these gingerbreads, please show me. You can find me on Instagram, you can find me on Facebook as a tiny pocket garden. And as usual, thank you for watching and have a great day.